Hello and welcome to Mann's Model Moments. In today's video I want to talk about what to consider when you're buying an airbrush. Now this is an emotive topic for some, as some people will tell you that there is only one solution to this, but the thing is, an airbrush does not exist in isolation. You see, this is connected by quick connectors, which I'd recommend by the way, but this is connected to the compressor at the moment, and the name airbrush is obviously because the device uses a stream of air to carry droplets of paint onto your model, so my point is that an airbrush can't be considered by itself. Therefore, when I talk about an airbrush, I'm really going to talk about an airbrush solution, which is made of these two parts, since they're inextricably linked. If you're starting off in airbrushing, there are a variety of different types and brands. I've several in my collection, some of which I'll show you here. These are all pretty cheap airbrushes. This is a Badger 150. And this is a Harder and Steenbeck Evolution Silverline. Out of all of these, the Badger 150 is my first and the oldest brush here. As you can see, all the rest have gravity feeds on them. This one isn't. This one draws up paint through the Venturi effect. The action of the air flowing past actually draws the paint up from the reservoir. I've got a lot of use out of this, and you can see I've got quick release fittings on all of these, and that's because there's no one airbrush here that I use exclusively. The Harder and Steenbeck Evolution is a really nice airbrush with a 0.2 needle in it, and I would not use this for the majority of the work that I do with airbrushing. So to start off, I would not recommend you getting a high-end airbrush right off the bat. By high-end, I'm talking anything sort of over 120, 150 pounds. Not that they're not excellent brushes, they are. This is a beautiful brush. The action, the control, the feel of it. As you can see from the cup, it uses very small amounts of paint. You can produce very fine detail, but that is probably not what you're going to start off doing. When you first start, let's just put this aside for a moment. So I'm left with a collection of cheap brushes. Okay, the Badger 150 at the time cost as much as the Silverline, but it's very robust, and that's the thing about most airbrushes. There are a fairly few number of components in there. And I can put that one aside at the moment because these three are all probably around the same. These probably cost around £20 each. It's very little, and you should see some of them have endured some pretty horrific abuse, but they keep going because there aren't that many components in an airbrush. Basically, you have the airbrush needle, which is removable, so you can take this needle all the way out, so you can replace that pretty easily. There's the nozzle. You have the main body, and then this is comprised of various sub-assemblies. This is the nozzle that corresponds to the brush, so if you're going to change elements in any brush, typically that needle and that nozzle are what determines most of the things, like the size of the line produced because of the flow of paint. Pretty much all the rest is seals. You've got this action here, which pushes down to release air, and then this pulls back for the flow of paint. You see, these all look pretty identical, although this has an extra piece which doesn't feature on the other brushes. Now you'll see all my brushes have the same basic action, and the one thing I will say definitively is you want a dual action airbrush, not a single action. A single action is where you spray when you pull the trigger, it's basically on or off. A dual action, you control the paint flow and airflow separately to deliver variable amounts of paint. So you press down to put airflow through and back for paint flow. That's an important skill that you'll want to learn as you're going along. So double action is what you want. That's the first thing. After that, I think actually what you're looking for in a first airbrush is something cheap and practical. And a lot of people say, no, you should start off with a good airbrush right off the bat. But let me say this. I bought this as a test a number of years ago. It was on Amazon for £27, including hose and tools and other pieces, just trying to see if it was any good. And yes, it was. And I'll put a link to that old blog post in the video description below. Now, when you start off, you'll probably want to spray larger areas. You're not going to start off doing tiny lines or tiny details, so actually starting off with something like this is a good idea, because if you make mistakes on this, and I mean the worst you can do is gum it up with paint, okay, which is still redeemable, but do you want to gum up a £20 airbrush with paint or a £200 airbrush? If you're going to make mistakes, make them with something cheap, something you can learn with, something that's going to be a bit more forgiving, so something pretty big like a 0.4mm nozzle and needle. So it'll be more forgiving, you can put paint through it and start with, use it for priming, use it for large area surfaces, and as you get the control you can start to reduce these down once you feel comfortable and confident with that. Then that is the time to get a better airbrush and extend those skills. And the thing is, this is not lost, because as you see I have a number of airbrushes here. Cheap ones I use for all sorts of things, big area spraying, etc. But ideally you don't want to be switching solvents between airbrushes. Not that they can't, it's just a bit of a pain. So if you don't get all of the solvents out, whatever they are, and then you say put a water-based paint into an airbrush that you've been using with lacquers, you can get bits drop out of solution, you can get immiscibility, and of course that leads to problems like blockages. So if you've got a number of cheap airbrushes, you can use one for just varnish, you can use one for enamels, use one for acrylics, use your best one for fine detail work, so there are no dead ends here. So start off with a cheap dual action brush. I wanted to say a massive thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel. We're now on the way to 1200 subscribers, which will date this video, I'm sure. I never thought that the channel would really grow in the way that it's grown over the past month, so thank you to everybody there. So I've done a couple of things along the way to help improve the quality of these videos for you. Firstly, I've got a new microphone. You may have noticed the quality of the audio changed about a month or so ago maybe in some of the videos. That takes a little while for them to sift through because some of the material I record was prior to that. But also I've invested in a new camera lens. So some of the quality of the zoom shots that I was doing was mainly through digital zoom, which isn't great, and also it's harder to focus in that way. So got a new Pentax lens for my DSLR, so hopefully you'll start to see the quality of those shots when I'm actually building models improve. I've also started a Patreon, so if you really want to support the channel, you can go to Patreon. I've got several levels of support there. So we have a Discord community, which will start with the Patreon. We've got some merch, we've got some stickers and mugs and t-shirts. I'll be doing raffles when we get to a certain threshold of Patreon subscribers. So it's just in its infancy, it's just literally started, brand new. So if you want to support the channel physically and materially, that is the best way to do it. That helps me continue to invest in these materials to help improve the content. And also with some of those Patreon levels will be things like voting on what videos you want to see next from a list of what I've got in the pipeline, along with things like giveaways and the higher tiers, like enabling you to actually work with me on a topic and go through that. So if there's a specific kit you want me to build, specific things you want to see, like particular weathering types, rust or whatever. So started that, we'll see where it goes. I've no particular expectations on that, and just your subscription is fantastic support. So thank you for all of that. The other thing you'll have to consider is that airbrushing is quite messy. It produces overspray, it produces particulates in the air, and many people don't have a dedicated space to do everything. To start with, you're going to need some way of enclosing your spray area. A cardboard box is fine to start with, just something to contain that overspray. You'll also want to protect your health, so a mask or some sort of extraction is ideal, but again, if you don't have that, spraying near an open door, a window or outside are all possibilities. And all this stops you having to invest a huge amount of money into something you don't know whether you're going to either use a lot or get comfortable with. I don't want to send you down a route of getting, £500 or £600 worth of gear, and then you decide that you can't get the hang of airbrushing, or you're not getting into the hobby enough to use it all, etc. So next up is the air supply, and that means compressed air. And for most of us, that means a compressor. In terms of compressors, they can be big, bulky, noisy, and expensive. I have a compressor. I'll put a photo of it because it's too big to put on the video. It actually sits under this desk. It's huge, it's got a massive tank on it, and I like that because it allows me to have a long continuous bout of spraying without the compressor going off. So that means I can charge it up in the evening so that I can spray into the night without annoying the neighbours with a big noisy compressor. So what if you don't have that luxury? Well, there are smaller, more portable compressors, but again, they're not necessarily cheap. 60, 80, 100 pounds is common, and they're usually still quite noisy, and quite often heavy. There's also a company called Neat and Handy. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. You can also find equivalent things on Amazon. I'll put some links below. And they'll actually sell an airbrush together with a little mini handheld compressor. So let's move that this way so these things can get in shot. These just fit in your hand. These other ones actually have a rechargeable battery, which is so you can get spare batteries you can carry on and spray for longer periods. This one actually arrived with this connected, so you had to hold the whole thing, which is relatively heavy, but it's quite easy to convert this to quick change fittings, to just have a hose, and then you just can use it as normal. A package with one of these, it's about £40, and that's for the compressor and the airbrush. And you can use it like this to start with and then convert it later on. Or all of these ones actually come with a hose separately and work on demand. You can then use these anywhere. In fact, you can take them with you if you're going to a show or a convention or something. You can take these with you and do some painting in the evenings, or if there's a painting area or something like that. So if you're going to get started in airbrushing, this is the solution that I would recommend to get you started, because you spend around £40, which is around the price of a single model kit. You can get the basics of the airbrush and how it's used, practice, get your skill level up, and then you can add onto it later. You can always go back to this for other uses, so you don't waste money on it. And the worst you can do if you really screw it up, and I mean completely destroy it somehow, then put it in the recycling and get another £20 airbrush to go on your compressor. Because that's far better than completely destroying your beautiful Evolution Infinity or Iwata or whatever it is that you bought. So the other thing is, of course, that you can use these with these little compressors. That's why I've got these interchangeable fittings. If I want to airbrush when I'm at a show and I want to take my nice airbrush, I can, because I've got this nifty portable compressor. So again, there's no dead end or redundancy here. So that's really all I wanted to say on airbrushing and getting your first airbrush. The things you need to consider are the space you've got, your budget, but also just what you're going to be using it for and how comfortable you are with it. I would say the best way to spend £40, the price of an average kit, and that will enable you to get started, try it out, get your practice and comfort levels up, do some exercises, get your control, and whilst you're doing that, you can also use it for, priming your models, doing large area camouflage schemes, all that kind of stuff. The JS2 that I did in my last video was sprayed with this £20 airbrush. I didn't use anything else. In fact, you can still see just around the edge the green that I used. It's clean inside, but just around the edges of the cup there. Anyway, that's what I recommend. You may disagree with me, you may have different opinions if you're an experienced modeler and airbrush user, but that's not really who this is aimed at. It's aimed at somebody who is thinking about starting airbrushing and what they need to consider. That is what I would recommend. Start small, learn to walk before you can run. There are no dead ends, you're not going to waste a huge amount of money. Whereas consider the alternative. You get a very expensive airbrush, you buy a big compressor, you get an extraction hood and all this gear. You can easily rack up £400 or £500 or more doing that. And then you find that you don't really have the patience for it, you don't really like using it, or you have to move or whatever it is. If I had to pack up and move now, all this kit is easy to move. My compressor underneath this table is a real ball ache. I mean, it's portable, it's got a couple of wheels on it and you lift it up on one side, but it's a real pain. It also requires maintenance. These little portable things, I'm not sure what maintenance they require, but it's not going to be huge compared to what I need to do for my big tank compressor. Now, I will do a video on all of the other things you need, but the airbrush. But if you want to get started, get one of these cheap 2-in-1 kind of deals. Practice, use it, see how you feel about it. Start to build up things like how to thin paint, because thinning paint is actually a critical part of airbrushing. And again, you don't want to be putting thick paint through your harder and Steenbeck and messing it up on your first try. There are plenty of YouTube tutorials on using an airbrush, so it's never been easier or cheaper to jump in and try it. That's all for this instalment of Mann's Model Moments. Please like, subscribe and share this video if you enjoyed it. It's the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like it. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.